Hi, Black Hollywood Live fans. Today we have major updates on Making a Murderer and marijuana laws.
You are tuned in to Black Hollywood Lives. Justice is served.
Hello and welcome to Justice is Served. Thank you for joining me. My name is Chelsea Galicia and I am joined by my co-host and fellow attorney, Shaka Smith. We are down one man. We still got to get our third man back. We got one that went to travel the world and the other went to join the political campaign. Yeah. So I love it when we got three. But for the time being, we'll hold down the fort and bring you the latest in this week's legal news. Starting with a shocking overturning of the conviction of the younger of the two found guilty in the murder of Teresa Halbach that was covered, documented in the show Making a Murderer.
Yeah, I remember we did the panel on the actual series and we were all incensed, probably the most by this conviction of Brendan Dassey.
Right, so his was so upsetting because there was no physical evidence to tie him to the crimes. The only thing that got him convicted was this confession, or this kind of series of confession. It was like this back and forth. He confessed, he didn't confess, and we saw the circumstances under which the confession came out,
which were absolutely shocking, you know.
Yeah, the investigators really pressured him, saying, I already know what you did. We already know what happened. We'll help you. We can only stand by if you help us, if you tell the truth. He was there without a parent, an attorney. His mother was sort of denied the opportunity to be there.
And obviously, we know from that video, he didn't understand the gravity of what he was saying because he thought he can go back to sixth period and even see WrestleMania.
Right. When they did arrest him, he's like, well, is it just for one night? And, you know, that was the last night that he was ever free. Yeah. So it was under these circumstances and the fact that he has a relatively low IQ.
76, yeah.
That the judge says that this confession was involuntary.
Yeah, I mean, these police, Fassbender and Weigert, used the Reed method, which they have found not to be reliable. And most of these confessions that are gotten using the Reed method are actually false. People are just wanting to get out of the room.
Right. So the federal judge just tossed out what three lower courts had upheld, because the Manitowoc County judge had upheld the conviction, so did the Wisconsin Court of Appeals, and then the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's extremely rare, but I think in this circumstance, having that video really made the difference, and obviously it being publicized by Netflix.
That was a question that came to my mind. I mean, nobody is going to admit, oh yeah, my mind was changed because of a Netflix documentary, but do you think that the series and the maybe talk all about it got enough attention that it did make a difference in this case?
Yeah, I would say what's become clear to me is that there are things like this happening in small counties everywhere. And it's the exposure of what was taking place that really got a harder look at this case. I think he may well be sitting in prison still, if not for that documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because it's just so traditional that as the higher courts go, they sort of just stamp up what the lower courts do, even though they're supposed to be reviewing things. So this is really, really rare. I mean, you can go take a look at like the list of cases that have been overturned, and it's like 5 cases maybe in each state, except for Texas. Texas had a lot of overturned convictions. So now the judge has said that he's got 90 days to be either retried or let go. What do you think the chances are that he'll be retried?
I think they may retry Brendan Dassey. I think when prosecutors get a win, they like to keep that win. It's just the mentality of prosecutors, and so I think it's a high likelihood they may try to retry this case.
I can't think though what evidence they would use, because if there's no confession, no physical evidence, no witnesses, how do you think they're going to support a claim?
Well, they can go back and try to get another confession from Brendan Dassey. There may be some physical evidence we haven't heard of. There may have been things that have taken place in the past 10 years that may bolster their case.
Yeah, I would doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we did find was deleterious is what they had 2 different theories for their case. They stood up in court for the Stephen Avery case and said one man did this.
And that was Stephen Avery.
And that was Stephen Avery.
Yeah.
And after they obtained that Stephen Avery conviction, they went and then pursued the Brendan Dassey conviction. And so as many lawyers have already said, obviously if you're going for 2 theories of the case, you're not going for the truth, you're going for a conviction.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So it looks good, I think, for Brendan Dassey. I think he's going to go home pretty soon and stay out, assuming he does not, of course, get in trouble for something else. But the question then becomes, will this overturning of Brendan Dassey's conviction have any bearing on Stephen Avery's case?
And we do know from a legal standpoint, no, because they didn't use a confession in Stephen Avery's case. They never brought Brendan Dassey on the stand. So it never factored in into Stephen Avery's case.
Right, so this confession didn't sort of taint Stephen Avery's case.
But if I think this kind of adds to our sort of cognitive senses that this whole thing was a sham.
Yeah.
And so I think it'll help in that sense, but legally, absolutely not.
So what is exciting is that there's season 2 of Making a Murder in the works, which will, of course, cover this. And Stephen Avery's attorney has said, this is going to be her 18th time overturning a conviction.
Yeah, Zellner's already had 17, so hopefully she does make it.
Yeah, and she's got pretty much till the end of the month to finalize.
Yeah, she asked for an extension, but what she is really claiming is that she's got some damning evidence. So we'll go ahead and see if she backs it up in her brief on the 29th.
Yeah, can't wait. All right. And then who knew that Wisconsin was such a hotbed for legal stories? Because we have another story out of the same state that normally only produces cheese, I understand. I've never been there, so I don't know anything about it. But this tragic story, another in a shooting death of a young man, happened in Milwaukee that's led to some pretty violent riots. But let's go back to where this began and talk about the killing of Sylville Smith. But it's not just his killing that is the cause of this, but it's the immediate precipitating event that has caused these riots. So the first thing that struck me about this case is that he was in a car with somebody else when it got pulled over. And the mayor did a press conference and said they were pulled over for something that seemed like suspicious activity. And then the mayor went off and really emphasized there was a gun and it was stolen and it had 20 some odd rounds in it, and the officers faced that. But at the time that they were pulled over, the officers didn't know anything about it. So it struck me as not cool that in the press conference they couldn't name the
suspicious activity that caused them to pull his car over.
Because you still, under the Fourth Amendment, need some sort of reasonable suspicion to even pull a car over. So that created a spiraling series a series of events where Sylville and the other man fled the cars. An officer chased him down, and it's not clear about what happened because even though the officer was wearing a body cam, that footage has not been released.
It's not been released, but we're told they were wearing the body cams and they were operational. So we do know that we should at least have footage that we should see eventually.
Right. And apparently still shots from the body cam show that he was in fact carrying a gun. The question whether it was pointed at an officer, whether he had fired any shots, remains unknown. I'm not even sure it makes that big of a difference.
Well, my red flags are raised anytime I hear a suspect gets killed while fleeing. When I hear a suspect is leaving a scene and fleeing the scene and they're somehow killed, that kind of raises my alarms.
So as of now, we just know that he was struck and killed by an officer whose name was just released today. And apparently it was somebody that he knew.
Yeah, Dominic Hegan-Brown. They went to high school together. They knew each other. And, I believe his sister said that there may have been an issue of jealousy. We don't know if it's true or not, but these two have a little bit of history.
That's really interesting that just came out.
And what also came out was that this guy was also a local rapper. And one of his lines...
This officer.
Yeah, this officer was a local rapper, and one of his lines was, "I'm going to start a riot like Baltimore." So it kind of gives you a little sense into the mindset of this guy.
Wow, that is pretty eerie. So, the context of this shooting is that it came on the same, stretch of hours. Like within 24 hours, there had been 5 fatal shootings. So there was sort of this energy of violence going on in the city, and I wonder if police will use that to justify their heightened, trigger happiness, and the fact that the suspect had a gun. And of course they're pointing to, he had a lengthy arrest record, which this is totally irrelevant and should not make anybody swayed on whether the shooting was justifiable in
especially if that
either
did not
direction.
especially if that arrest record did not factor into the officer's assessment of the scene. If he knew him and then knew he had the lengthy arrest record and knew he was involved in certain crimes, that may somewhat contribute to his mindset at the time. But again, if I hear someone fleeing, it just raises some big flags for me.
Yeah, I do, hear in the mind of what I think the public is saying is like, oh, this guy was a bad guy anyway, let's not make such a big deal out of it. He had been arrested for a number of things, only convicted of a misdemeanor, never a felony. Some were one was pretty disturbing, intimidating a witness who he had allegedly assaulted, having his girlfriend go over and have the guy recant his story and all that.
But certainly what a slippery slope if we let the ends justify the means to be the law of the land.
Right. And so even if this one case doesn't, this one shooting, you don't feel necessarily empathetic for that guy. There are, been 5 other or so young men killed by police officers in the last few years that have really inflamed the community. Apparently, Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the country. And just in December of 2015, the city agreed to pay $5 million for claims over illegal strip searches that included body cavity searches. 74 black residents had, in some way or another, either on their own or come together, filed these claims. And when the city, of course, doesn't acknowledge any wrongdoing but hands over $5 million,
you certainly have a sense that something's not right.
Yeah. So to me, the riots are understandable, even though we don't like them.
Well, yeah, it's a product of that feeling of oppression.
It's just absolute frustration.
Yeah, they're not.
And
we're not going
fear.
to justify them, but certainly we have to understand where it's coming from. But I would note that a lot of people in the community went ahead and swept up some of the debris from the riots. They went out and cleaned up the streets. So when you're talking about riots, you're not talking about the entire community as a whole. There are people that are out there advocating for nonviolence. You have his sister who already condemned the violence because they recognize it's hurting the community. But I think a lot of times after events like this, you get that moment of reaction. And so we're seeing a response to that.
Yeah. All right. Well, the ironic thing is Milwaukee had sort of submitted itself for review voluntarily. And had that not happened, I think maybe after this, the DOJ would have stepped in. But it seems that this is one more city added to the list of Baltimore and Ferguson, where the DOJ is going to come in and help institute some new policies and direction.
Yeah, and hopefully cities look at this proactively and start doing the same, because these cases aren't isolated. I think there's tons of cities where they're suffering through racial tension. So
yeah, hopefully the cities see it coming and they do something
about it now
to prevent it from happening. Yeah. Okay, and we'll now take a break from our covering news out of Wisconsin to hear a word from our sponsor through the mouth of Shaka Smith.
Yes, thank you, General Assembly. Looking for a career in tech? I guess we all are these days, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe business, data, design, or marketing. Trying to get that promotion or raise. Who isn't?
For sure, that marketing thing.
Yeah. To excel in the career, you need 21st century training and skills. General Assembly is the largest and most respected school worldwide for people seeking to grow their talents and master the marketplace. Whether it's learning remotely online or in person at one of their beautiful campuses, you can join the 350,000 people who have already gotten the training needed to propel careers in tech and business. Wow, that's a lot. Wow. More than 2,500 companies worldwide hire GA's graduates, with 99% of graduates who participate in GA's career services landing a new role and field within 6 months of starting their job search.
Really impressive.
Would have been nice to have that come out of law school, 99%.
Yeah.
Take control of your talent and career now. Find out more at ga.co/geek. That's ga.co/geek. Enter the promo code GEEK, that's GEEK, to save on your first class, workshop, or event. Again, that's ga.co/geek. Code word GEEK.
Awesome. Thank you so much, General Assembly and Shaka, for reading that. So now let's move on to a settlement that was reached in the shooting death of Akai Gurley. He was the gentleman in the stairwell in the housing project in Brooklyn. Just randomly, I mean, like, how this happened is just crazy, where an officer Peter Liang had his gun out, going through a dark stairwell. Something spooked the officer.
And he shoots.
Pulled the trigger, and the bullet ricocheted off the railing or something and hit him. He was down, one lower floor. The officer had been convicted. The judge, brought the charges that he'd been convicted down to basically saying it was an accident.
Yeah, so now I think he got probation.
Right, no jail time. But now the city will pay, well, in total, there's going to be $4.5 million going to his 4-year-old daughter. And that's 4.1 from the city itself, 400,000 from the housing authority, probably because there were no lights in the stairwell and that contributed to the death. And interestingly enough, some money personally from the officer, $25,000. Yeah. I was surprised not by the amount, but by the fact that the officer personally has to put money towards that settlement.
Well, I think it's only fair. It was his mistake, and obviously he's not getting jail time. And I think it's kind of an equitable solution. It seemed like it was a genuine mistake, but it was reckless. You're in a position of power, and you're dealing with lethal power. So
it totally seems fair. I can imagine there's people on the other side saying, when you make a mistake at your job, you don't have to pay money for it.
Yeah. This goes over and above a job mistake, though.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm just trying to think of what are people on the other side of this going to say. But I do agree that he should be paying something, and $25,000 seems like a relatively fair amount. The money is going to be paid out to the daughter in a structured settlement.
Akai Gurley, yeah.
So when she becomes 18 years old, she'll start getting money.
She's 4 years old now.
So she's got to wait a while.
Let's say that again. She's 4 years old now. Her father is dead, and she doesn't get money until she's 18. That, to me, is where I was a little incensed about this case.
Well, the mother can petition to receive a monthly stipend.
Why is that not part of the settlement? Well, why is it the fact that this father can no longer raise his child and provide for her, that she's not getting care and provision between 4 and 18?
I imagine that they know that she can apply for the monthly stipend and will probably get it. I imagine that the reason why the default is that the daughter can't get it till she's 18 is because nobody under 18 can legally receive money.
But we know that you put money in trust for parents to use for their kid, and certainly setting aside $1 million between 4 and 18 and having her start receiving her structured payment 3.1 at 18 would seem a lot more equitable. I just don't understand why between now and the critical time that she needs her father and his support, she's not getting it. But.
Yeah. Interesting, but I do hope that the monthly stipend comes out to something that is fair. And the mother has said that she's going to try and raise her daughter so that Akai would be proud of her. So it seems to be, I don't know.
Keep going.
Okay. It seems to be sort of like the going rate for a police officer killing somebody. $4 or $5 million.
Yeah.
This is going to start getting really expensive for these cities, don't you think?
Well, yeah, I think that's the point. I would think now the cities having to face this having kind of a blueprint for what they need to pay would make them take steps to avoid this.
All right.
So invest in their cities and invest in their police departments and training so that this is not a commonality.
We certainly hope so. And it seems to me that the city of Compton or Los Angeles is soon going to be paying a similar size settlement to the family of Donnell Thompson. He is the man killed on July 28th in Compton by an officer with an assault rifle standing in an armored car.
Yeah, called the Bearcat.
Yeah. Thompson had not done anything but was confused for a carjacking suspect that had just led police on a chase that involved an exchange of gunfire.
A carjacking suspect they already had in custody.
Right. So the carjacking suspect fled, hit a car somewhere there was shots exchanged. Yeah. He hit a car, so he jumps out of the car, runs towards these houses, goes into a house, throws the gun under a couch. I mean, I can't even make this up. This sounds like it belongs in a movie. Strips down naked, throws his clothes somewhere, and jumps in bed.
With an elderly woman.
That he doesn't know.
Yeah.
Trying to evade police. Police find him anyway.
Yeah.
But at the same time, within seconds of that, some man is calling the police claiming that there's a man or a figure in his front yard.
Yeah.
And the man in the front yard apparently matched the description of the carjacking suspect.
And at the time that they're going to pursue Donald, who we now know as Donald Thompson, they already knew they had this other guy in custody.
But somehow communication was not good,
Yeah.
and the armored car rolled up to the scene and started shooting not gunfire at him, but different.
So they detonate flashbangs while he's like, I guess, sleeping in the front yard.
Right.
They don't wake him with the flashbangs, and so at some point they fire foam bullets at him, and he gets up from the foam bullets and he runs towards the armored car, and they shoot him in the torso.
Right.
I still don't understand what's the need to shoot someone who is unarmed that's running towards your armored vehicle so you know you're protected.
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. For a while, the sheriff's department just said he was the second suspect in this carjacking, and then just this week finally admitted, okay, no, he was totally and completely innocent. This man had no record, no weapon. They refer to him as Little Bo Peep in the community because he was just, a shy guy, going about his life. Not sure why he was sleeping in somebody's yard, but that does not warrant being shot to death.
Yeah, and it's a shame that these police departments are so militarized now that this is the steps they're taking. And you would think in this particular case that militarization would have actually helped him, because they're an armored vehicle, so there's no need to shoot this guy.
They shouldn't have been at all in fear for their own safety. I don't really understand it either. So I think for sure we know there's going to be some sort of monetary settlement, sort of on the order of Akai Gurley's daughter's settlement.
And ultimately, as taxpayers, we're paying for this. We're paying for our police department's misdeeds.
Right. The question, though, is whether the officer who fired the shots deserves criminal charges.
I typically don't like to second-guess an officer's judgment in that moment. But given the facts of this case, I would say so.
Yeah. It would be exceedingly rare that we would see charges like that. But I think
it reads like an assassination.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that the officer would think in his mind, in my mind, I'm thinking, this guy matches the description, which was very vague. It was only like black man between his 20s and 30s wearing dark shorts
and like a tank top
and a basketball jersey.
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot of people.
Yeah.
But that, the officer says he matched that description. He was in the neighborhood. He was not complying with demands, or not responding to these foam bullets being shot at him. I'm not sure how somebody is supposed to respond to those well. And then charged at me.
Wait, while he was in the armored vehicle.
Right.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell while he was laying down if there was a weapon or not, because of the way that he was sleeping. Apparently one hand was under his head and the other was like around his waist, maybe hiding his hand underneath him. So it was possible that he maybe had a weapon, because the carjacking suspect had a weapon and had at least fired at police officers. So I can already imagine the story that the officer is telling himself and prepared to tell
But at the point
investigators.
he's charging you, you must see he's got no weapon in his hand. And you're, again, in an armored vehicle.
Right, where you could have just ducked down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I hope this is not another time that we are disappointed by the decision not to bring charges. And we almost forgot to touch on our breaking news story about Cosby.
Yeah.
So we're waiting with a bated breath for this trial to begin. We talked last week about some hiccups for Cosby, and now another one.
Yes, it seems his lead attorney has resigned the case. So we don't know exactly why she's resigned.
This is Monique Presley.
Yeah.
She was the one who was going around all over TV on these interviews, speaking a mile a minute, not making very much sense, but just really passionately in defense of Cosby.
Yeah, and pushing the fact that he was blind and she had to assist him. But, so we do know that the other side had requested she be removed some time ago from the case because during a deposition, as an attorney, you can only practice in certain jurisdictions.
In the state where you were barred.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you do need to apply for special permission to practice in other states, and apparently during the deposition she didn't do that, so they were asking her to be removed from the case. We don't know if that has anything to do with why she's left now, but we know it's happened, so another setback for Mr. Cosby.
All right. And we'll certainly bring you any updates on that because we are just waiting for this trial. I can't wait for that to begin. All right. And so now some bummer news to leave you with. The DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, was given the opportunity, was asked to reschedule marijuana. So a little bit of background. Under the Controlled Substance Act of 1970, marijuana was placed in a category. These schedules were named for how addictive a drug was or for how useful it was medically, and therefore the public's ability to get a hold of it.
And so it's assigned to Schedule 1, saying it had no medical value whatsoever.
Right. So it's up there listed with heroin and LSD. And much of the public, including myself and even members of Congress, have said it's time to either reschedule it or deschedule it altogether. And the DEA decided, nope, we're going to leave it as Schedule 1. Did that make sense to you?
No, not at all. And it makes it just more difficult to study the drug. The only somewhat upside to this is right now it looks like University of Mississippi has the only sort of license from the DEA to grow marijuana and to study it. And they have decided to say that they're going to offer more licenses to different institutions that apply and, follow certain protocols.
Yeah, I saw that and then I was like, it's kind of a red herring good news because first of all, there is research that's already been done decades ago by government agencies showing that it was safe and effective for curing or alleviating medical conditions. So we already have that. It's just like decades old.
Yeah, and it's certainly we can get more of it if they move it to Schedule 2.
But the question then is, all right, so now the DEA is going to open up the number of facilities or groups or organizations that can study it. All right. And then they're going to have these studies. These studies go for years. Studies have to go over 10, 20 years, if not longer. And then many studies need to be duplicated before anyone starts to give them any kind of credibility. Right? So this, for me, I see is just a delay tactic because I think the evidence already exists within the government studies. They just don't want to acknowledge them. This is just going to drag things out further. Meanwhile, we're going to have, billions of dollars that we keep wasting on this deadly war on drugs. We're going to have millions of people who have medical conditions like children with epilepsy who could be helped with cannabis and who will not be. And we're going to continue to pump in these dangerous painkillers into our society that have led to tens of thousands of people dying a year.
Yeah, and we're not talking about them moving pot to Schedule 2. We're talking about them making drugs that are derived from marijuana to Schedule 2, whether it's CBD oils that actually don't get you high, that are used for epilepsy and seizures. So we're not talking about traditional pot, and I think that is what's really upsetting. We're talking about actual medicinal marijuana.
Yeah, and then the other part, the problem for me is that in order for the DEA to change its scheduling, it's going to want the FDA to be on board. The FDA is incredibly powerful when it comes to any food and drug, obviously, Food and Drug Administration. All right, fine. Who controls the FDA? Who influences the FDA? When you look at who does, you can see that it's people that come from or who represent big pharmaceutical companies, big agricultural companies, and these companies do not want to see marijuana legalized overnight because it will cut into their bottom line drastically.
And once you see those companies start to prepare for marijuana being legal and they feel they're ready, then
that's
you'll
exactly
have
the problem.
change,
We're doing this delay tactic so that big businesses can line themselves up, can patent all sorts of things, and sort of screw out the small entrepreneur who wants to get in
eliminate
on this.
competition, yeah.
Right. And meanwhile, we've wasted all this money and thrown away countless lives. We continue making arrests. We still have 500,000 nonviolent drug offenders in prison that we have to, pay for, and who are losing their lives just rotting away in jail.
All in the midst of an opioid crisis that is on schedule, too.
So this is what makes me so incensed about this decision, and I don't have very much faith that things are going to change anytime soon, because I see Hillary Clinton, who is likely going to be the next president. I would much prefer her over Trump, but I don't like the fact that I think these same players from the FDA and the DEA and are going to be like running amok. This is the same thing as like the SEC is overseen by people who come from Wall Street, who still have ties to Wall Street, who will go back to Wall Street after their bout at the SEC. And so the same thing happens in these federal agencies. And so this is why I'm like, come on, people, this is why we needed Bernie. But we don't have that choice now.
Hillary's vowed to reschedule. So Hillary has vowed that when she's in office, she's going to reschedule marijuana.
All right. Well, in the meantime, we just found out, I guess it was today, that a 9th District Court, so that's the federal district that is on the west side, or west side of the country, which includes California all the way up to, Washington, and there were about 10 cases where the Department of Justice was going after patients and growers for medicinal use of marijuana.
Yeah.
And the 9th District Court said, 9th Circuit District Court said, you can't do that, DOJ. Yeah. Congress has said we're not putting money into the enforcement of the federal marijuana ban, so you have nothing, no teeth to go after these people with. So you cannot use
federal money to prosecute people that are incompliant with their state law.
Right. So that is like a teeny tiny bit of good news, although the judge who wrote the opinion did say, at any point, Congress tomorrow can decide to put money back into that.
Yeah.
I doubt very much that that's going to happen. Congress is on vacation a lot and can't really address anything that needs to be addressed. So I don't think that this is going to be sort of overturned. Yeah. So, a very teeny bit of good news in what I think is a really bummer of a situation, to put it lightly. All right. Well, have we covered it all?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, I think that's it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and join us again next week on Justice is Served. You can always reach, tweet, comment, like. I'm at Chelsea Galicia.
I'm at Shaka Strong on Twitter and Instagram. Like us, give us 5 stars.
And we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
From executives Keven Undergaro, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, and the entire BHL staff, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us. info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I am the official voice of Black Hollywood Live, Scipio, Instagram at KingXOBay. Thanks for tuning in.
Hollywood Redefined.
The views expressed here are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.